Shalom, and welcome to this special edition of Gleanings about God. A few words of introduction about this video. When I came to JTS in 1996, after many years of running synagogue and day schools and being a staff member and camper at Camps Ramah, I ran into my friend and colleague, Rabbi Neil Gilman, and I was a professor of Jewish philosophy and theology. And Neil railed to me about how the fact that the least discussed character in Jewish education was God, and that he was sort of wringing his hands over the fact that God did not seem to be part of the curriculum in Jewish schools. So I said to Neil, let's do something about it. And we created a course, a team-taught course, one of the first at JTS, called Translating Jewish Theology into Educational Settings. Neil did the heavy lifting about the theologies of God, Revelation, Theodicy, the problem of evil, eschatology, what happens at the end of days. And I tried to show students from the Davidson School, the Rabbinical School, the Cantorial School, Graduate School, how you could make these esoteric and thick ideas available to learners of all ages from preschool through adult. And together we taught that course for 11 years and I think influenced a large number of students at JTS, and the course then went through other iterations in the years since we actually taught it. And I thought that for this special edition of Gleanings, I would give you a little bit of a sense of what we did in that course and how we helped students create theories of practice about how to teach these difficult concepts. Somebody once said that there is nothing as practical as a good theory. So what I want to outline for you today is a theory of practice about how we should approach the teaching of God in Jewish education, in all settings, day schools, synagogue schools, summer camps, adult education, whatever area you choose to work in. And so permit me to give you this theory of practice, which to some extent is based on the principles that were enunciated in M.D. a guide to the principles of conservative Judaism, which I later turned into a source book for teenagers on understanding these ideas. I'm also a graduate of the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College, so I've been influenced by writings and teachers and issues there as well. So full disclosure, I am a person that comes from many backgrounds, and you should take that into account as you listen to me. So I want to outline, first of all, this theory of practice. As Jews, we believe in God. Now, I know that's hard for some people because they might have doubts about God, they might have questions about God, they may not be sure what they mean by God. That's okay. But Judaism is based around a source of meaning that stems from God as the center of the universe and the organizing force of the universe. Now, often in religious school, a child will raise his hand in order to press your button, and he'll say, well, I don't believe in God. They got the button pressed. So my response when a child says that to me is, tell me about the nature of the God in which you don't believe. Well, I don't believe God is fair. I say, I don't believe God is fair either. Well, I don't believe God, rewards the righteous and punishes the wicked. I don't believe that either. But you believe in God. Yeah, let's keep talking. That opens up a faith conversation as opposed to allowing it to be closed down because a child has taken a position to kind of press your buttons and be negative about the issues about which he may have a lot of strong feelings but has not had a chance to talk about them in any significant way. So the first principle is that we believe in God, and talking about God and getting more comfortable with the nature and notions of God in Judaism is something we have to do as religious educators. 2, there's no part of Judaism, no part of the elephant that you can touch where God is not associated, whether it's Jewish history or practice or law or custom or culture. God is in the mix somewhere, and it can't be avoided, and it shouldn't be avoided. So we believe in God. God touches everything that revolves around Jewish civilization. And 3, God talk, being comfortable talking about faith and faith assumptions and belief is something we need to do as Jews. I used to think that our friends, the ultra-Orthodox or the Haredim, talked about God all the time, but they really don't. They talk about Torah and mitzvahs, they talk about halacha, but they don't really talk about issues of personal faith and doubt and questions. And most of us are afraid to talk about God because we think there are some right answers. And we don't have them, so we better not talk about them. When questions come up in a classroom or in a bunk or at camp, we don't want to talk about something that we're not sure we have the right answer to. Well, that's the point. The point is you don't have to have the right answer. You have to value the questions. And you have to help students of all ages be able to ask questions about God talk and feel comfortable raising the issues. And it's a much more mature and helpful educational point of view to say, that's a wonderful question you just asked. I don't know the answer. Let's go search out the answer together, because it's an important question and it deserves an answer. So we believe in God. All things in Judaism, in one way or another, touch on God. 3, we have to become more comfortable with God talk. Our Christian friends talk about God all the time, very comfortably, and we're afraid of it. We don't want to touch it. 4th, doubt, questioning, being angry with God, being upset with God, being furious with God, are all very Jewish emotions. And they go way back to the beginning of our people's journey as a people. God wants to kill the Jews in the desert after the golden calf experience, and he sort of had it with the people, and Moses looks up and says to God, God, what will the neighbors say? You can't do this. And God relents. Later on in the Bible, you have the book of Job. Why did the rabbis put such a strange and complicated book into the Bible? Because they realize that all religious people, all people have faith, have doubts, have questions, and they have to be raised. Look at Psalm 13 in the book of Psalms, where the psalmist is crying out, Ad Anna Adonai, Ad Anna, how long will you punish me? How long will you hurt me? I've observed your mitzvot, I've done everything you wanted of me, and still, my life is terrible. And much later in Jewish history, you have this beautiful story told by Shai Agnon in a little book called Yamim Noraim, Days of Awe. It's little enough that I can put it in my talit bag when I go to Shul and Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. And if, God forbid, there should be a boring moment in the service, I can take it out and take a look at it. And he tells this wonderful story of a group of Hasidim who went to the Rebbe Erev Yom Kippur, and they said, Rebbe, how shall we prepare for the great white fast of Yom Kippur, for the awesome Day of Atonement where we stand before God in judgment? And he said, well, go across town and look in the window of, we'll call him Muttel, and see what he does. He'll teach you how to prepare for the great fast day. So they run across town, and they look in Muttel's window, and they see that Muttel is sitting there, and he gets up and he takes a big volume off the shelf and he opens it up and he starts reading numbers and sentences and numbers and sentences, and they realize that he has written down in very detail all of his misdeeds, all of his missings of the mark, all of his chataim, all of his sins, if you will, of the past year, and is recounting them to himself. And they think that's a very good idea. And he closes the book and he puts it up on the shelf. Then he takes a larger, thicker volume off the shelf, and he opens it up and starts reading numbers and sentences and numbers and sentences, and to their chagrin and horror, the Hasidim realize that he has written all of God's failings in the past year, and all of God's not living up to God's promises in the past year. And he closes the book, and he looks up, and he puts it back on the shelf, and looks up and he says to God, look, God, the fact of the matter is, you owe me more than I owe you. So in the spirit of mechila and slicha, forgiveness and giving atonement, I'll forgive you if you forgive me. And he reaches up and he takes off the shelf one of his best bottles of single malt scotch and drinks a l'chaim to God. Well, the Hasidim are scandalized. And they run back to the Rebbe. They said, this is what you sent us to? This is how we're supposed to prepare? And the Rebbe says, yes, because the fact that Muttel holds the God of Israel accountable is the reason we Jews can go to Shul on Yom Kippur and beg God for forgiveness. It's a two-way street. I often advise teachers that in the front of their rooms, somewhere, there'll be a box, and it should say doubt box. And you can make up these little slips of paper, and the slips have sort of sentence starters. Most of the time I doubt. Sometimes I doubt. Most of the time I am not sure. Sometimes I am not sure. I really think that. And this is an anonymous way for a child to write a question about God, a doubt, something that they're angry with, and put it in the box. And they don't have to put their name in it, and you don't have to know who did it and when. And then the point is that you open that box every once in a while, and you try to find answers to the questions. If you don't feel comfortable answering them yourself, then you get somebody in the room who can, whether it's the rabbi or the cantor or the educational director or somebody else in the community who is good at God talk. And you can then help children understand, or help learners of all age, that it's okay to write questions of doubt. And again, this whole notion of doubt and faith goes back to the fact that if we believe in God, we're going to have questions about God. If we try to talk about God and everything Jewish, then those questions are going to arise. If we want to get people more comfortable with talking about God, we need to help them do it. Over the years, I developed a couple of exercises to get people more comfortable with God. One is a faith interview that was in the book called Willing, Learning, Striving, a guide for teaching youth about Emet V'Emunah. And it had questions such as, if there is a God, how do you picture God? Do you talk to God yourself? Have you ever felt God talking to you? Or have you ever felt God's presence? Is there anything that makes you angry about God? And it goes on to list about 12 questions, or 20 questions. And it's supposed to be done in partners. And you interview each other. And wonderful things happen. I've done this with learners of all ages. And I've done it with married couples who've been married for 30 or 40 years. And they say, you know what? This is the first time we ever had a conversation about God. Never talked about it before. And it's enlightening and opening and brings people together. There was another exercise I developed in Leila Le'ela, Higher and Higher, making Jewish prayer part of us, called the Names of God. 157 names of God I pulled out of Jewish tradition, from the Bible all the way through modern Sidurim. And these are simply metaphors for God, and we'll talk about metaphor in a few minutes. But I ask people, look at this list. Tell me about the ones you like and the ones you don't like. I give them permission to do that, because these are just different names that different people, different poets over time came up with about how do we talk about God. And some will like this one and some will like that one. And I'm always amused when somebody raises their hand and says, well, I don't like the name for God that says Adonai Ish Milchama, God, man of war, which we say twice a day in the liturgy. And somebody else will raise their hand and say, well, my son just went into Tzahal, into the Israeli army, and I like that very much. So it depends on where you're coming from and your point of view in life. So we believe in God. Everything Jewish somehow touches on God. We need to be more comfortable talking about God. Doubt, questioning, being upset with God are very Jewish emotions. The next point. There's a wide range of points of view in Judaism about what God is. Yes, there are some out-of-bounds notions. We don't believe in a Trinitarian notion of God, that God is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and that God can take human form. That's out of bounds. And we don't believe in a dualistic notion that there's a God and a Satan and they're battling for a hegemony over the universe. But within that spectrum, there's a wide range of points of view about what God might be. Everything from the traditionalist notion that God is external to the universe and brought it into being, and God is the mitzaver, and we are the mitzuvim, God is the commander, and we are the commanded, and everything flows from that relationship, all the way over to Mordechai Kaplan, who says that God is the power that makes for salvation, that the universe is so constituted as to be striving for goodness, as to be striving for self-betterment, and we find God in godly acts of bringing God into the world by doing a mitzvah, by saying a bracha, by finding God in each other, and all the way in between. I think that's why the rabbis wisely started the Amidah with the Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu ve'Elohei Avotenu, Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, and now we add Elohei Sarah Rivka, right? Why didn't they just say Elohei Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov? Fewer words, easy to remember, because they understood that Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, each one of the patriarchs and each one of the matriarchs understood and saw God differently, as does every one of us and every one of you viewing this video. We all have our different understandings of God based on our experience, our lives, the people we have met, the people who have taught us, the books we have read. When I was 19 years old, I went to my first year at the joint program between JTS and Columbia. I went to a retreat at Camp Ramon Nyack, and I managed to get the chance to talk to Professor Yochanan Muff, Salav Shalom, who was standing on the steps outside the little chapel. And we got talking about God, and I said, well, I guess you believe in God. That's what you do. He said, well, Steve, he said, the fact of the matter is that the God I believed in yesterday is not the God I believe in today. It won't be the God I believe in tomorrow. Because as you change, your understanding of God changes. As you experience life, that experience gives you a different perspective on the nature of God. So the God of your childhood may not be the God of your adulthood. That was such a liberating moment when Rabbi Muffs said that to me. It just sort of opened my world up to understanding that faith can develop and growth can happen in your adult life theologically. So we believe in God. Everything Jewish touches on God. We need to get more comfortable talking about God and not being afraid of it and realizing it's okay to say we don't have the answers. Doubt, questioning, upsetness with God are very Jewish. There's a wide spectrum of points of view about what God is in our tradition. And finally, and maybe the blockbuster, as Rabbi Gilman would talk about, is the following notion, that for us, all talk of God in Jewish tradition is metaphorical. All talk of God in Jewish tradition is metaphorical. God doesn't see, and God doesn't hear, and God doesn't speak, and God doesn't stretch out his right arm, and God is not a he. Ein lo demut haguf, ein no guf, we say in Yigdal from the Rambam. God has no corporeal reality. God is not a body in space. Now, that wasn't always true. There was a group of Jews who, in the Shurei Koma mystical literature, tried to measure the size of the divine body in space in sort of light years. It was a very masculine God, so they even managed to measure the size of the divine phallus. But for us today, and pretty much since that time, the language of God is metaphorical. Now, don't say that Brown said God is a metaphor. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that we talk about God in metaphorical terms. We're human beings. We know what bodies are. We know what the extremities of our bodies can do. And we talk about God in terms we can understand. And so we use a lot of anthropomorphic metaphors to describe that which is unknowable. Now, there's always a question that young children ask their parents in this regard. Almost every child at one point or another will ask their parents or their teachers, where is God? And most well-meaning adults will give what answer? God is everywhere. I can't think of anything more frightening to tell a young child. That means God is under the bed, God is in the closet, God is behind the shower curtain. You can never be alone. Imagine if your parent was staring over your shoulder 24/7 all the time. You'd go crazy. So the notion that answering that question, where is God, with a physical metaphor that God is everywhere, is antithetical to what we mean by God. And it's probably frightening to a young child. So you say, well, Steve, what do you say? What do you say to a child who says, where is God? And I say the following. I really can't answer that question, where is God, because I don't think God is in a place. God doesn't have a body like we do. But I can answer a different question if you ask me. And that question is, when is God? God is when you do a mitzvah. God is when you say a bracha. God is when you make the world a better place. God is when you treat your fellow human being as in the image of God. That's when God is. There is a wonderful book that I recommend to all my students and to you, and something you should have in your library, and you should give as presents to your children, your grandchildren, and read to kids. It's called Old Turtle by Douglas Wood. And it's a beautiful book with magnificent illustrations in the book. And the book has all about wonderful metaphors about God. And something very interesting happens in the story of Old Turtle, where the metaphors at first are from the individual's point of view. Like an island will say, well, God is separate and apart, reflecting on what an island feels. Later on in the book, the metaphors change, and the island will say, well, God's love touches everyone. And you watch the metaphorical change, but what the book does is give you the language of metaphor to help young children understand that we talk about God in metaphorical terms. And we as educators need to become much more comfortable and much more fluent in the way we teach metaphorical thinking to children. On Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, when we get to the Untana Tokef, the central prayer of the high holidays, God is not sitting up on a cloud on a throne writing in a book who will live and who will die, and counting us like sheep. That's a metaphor for the fact that we are not in control, that the vagaries of life and the nature of randomness in the universe is such that life is precious and life is sometimes very insecure. And so we stand before God on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur realizing that with all our technology and all our knowledge, we are not in control of everything. And that's what that tefillah is trying to, in a metaphorical way, say to us as Jews. So we believe in God. Everything Jewish in one way or another touches on God, or God touches it. We need to be more comfortable talking about God. We have to understand that faith and questioning and doubt are very Jewish emotions, and they should be fostered and helped, and students should feel free to raise those issues. And the doubt box is there so that if they're afraid to raise it with you, who represents 3,000 years of Jewish tradition, because you're standing in front of them, they have a safe way to do it. 4, there's a wide range of points of view about what God is in Jewish life and in Jewish civilization and Jewish religious belief. And 4th, all talk of God in Jewish tradition is metaphorical. And I want to leave you with my favorite story about God, and maybe after speaking about metaphors and belief, it'll become your favorite story as well. It's a story about a single parent who's got 2 pre-adolescent boys who are very recalcitrant. They're always getting into trouble. No matter what she does, she's taking them to therapy. She's put them on medication. She's taking them to behavior therapy. Finally, she's tearing her hair out, and as a last resort, she figures she'll take them to the rabbi. Maybe he could put the fear of God into them, and that will change their behavior. So they come to the rabbi's study, and they wait outside quietly, and the rabbi invites the older brother into his study. And the boy is sitting in front of the rabbi's desk, and the rabbi leans over and says, "Where is God?" The child doesn't say anything. And he says more loudly, "Where is God?" Not a word. Then he screams, "Where is God?" And the young boy jumps up, runs out of the rabbi's study, starts running out of the synagogue. The younger brother sees this and follows his older brother. They run all the way home. They go into the house. They go into the deepest, darkest closet they can find and shut the door. And finally, after they catch their breath, the younger brother asks the older brother, "What happened? What did the rabbi say to you?" He says, "Well, you see, it's like this. God is missing, and they think we're responsible." Enjoy getting used to God talk. Shalom, kol tuv.